candles nearby. Alrighty. You see that somebody's in here? Are we good to go? Hold on, don't mind me as I open up fucking gummies. There we go. Fuck. Okay, my mic's not crackling, aside from the obvious wrapper. Hey fam, sounds okay. As long as we sounding good. Okay, so all I'm nervous to read, even though I've read out to all of you already. So, are we good to go? Oh, I'm nervous. Now that I'm actually doing this, I'm nervous. Oh fuck. Okay. On London. Oh, note to reader. People speaking British English and people speaking American English mostly understand each other fine. But there are a few words we use in Britain that you might not recognize, or that we use differently from you. Should you encounter a strange or a difficult word in the story, please flip to the short glossary, which is located in the back of this book. Oh, I'm not reading a story I made because they're never fucking done or finished. So, alright. Alrighty. Prologue. In an unremarkable room in a nondescript building, a man sat working at a very nondescript theory. I promise I said that twice. I'm not stuttering. The man was surrounded by bright chemicals in bottles and flasks, charts and gauges, and piles of books like battlements around him. He propped them open on each other. He cross-referenced them, seeming to read several at a time. He pondered, made notes, crossed the notes out, when hunting for facts of history, chemistry, and geography. Ooh. I feel like the music's just a tad too loud in my ears. Hold on. Excuse me. Audio. do 50. There we go. He was quiet, but for the scuttling of his pen and his occasional murmurs of revelation. He was obviously working on something very difficult. From his mutters and the exclamation marks he scrawled, though he was slowly making progress. The man has traveled a very long way to do the work he was doing. He was so engrossed, it took him a long time to notice that the light around him was fading, unnaturally fast. Some sort of darkness was closing in on the windows, some sort of silence more than the absence of noise. The presence of a predatory quiet was unsettling around him. The man looked up at last. Slowly, he put down his pen and turned towards his chair. "Hello," he said. "Professor, is that you? Is the minister here?" There was no answer. The light from the corridor still faded. Through the smoked glass of the door, the man could see darkness taking shape. He stood, slowly. He sniffled, and his eyes widened. Fingers of smoke were wafting under the door, entering the room. They uncoiled from the crack like feelers. "So," the man whispered, "so it's you." There was no answer, but beyond the door came a very faint rumble that might just have been laughter. The man swallowed and stepped back, but he set his face. He watched as the smoke came more thickly around the edges of the door, eddying towards him. He reached for his notes. He moved quickly, dragging a chair as quietly as he could into a place below a high ventilation duct. He looked afraid, but determined, or determined, but afraid. The smoke kept coming. Before he had a chance to climb, there was another rumble, laugh, noise. The man faced the door. Part 1. Xana and Diva. Chapter 1. The Respectful Fox. There was no doubt about it. There was a fox behind the climbing frame, and was watching. It is, isn't it? The playground was full of children, their gray uniforms flapping as they ran and kicked balls into makeshift goals. Amid the shouting and the games, a few girls were watching the fox. "It definitely is. It's just watching us," a tall blonde girl said. She could see the animal clearly behind a fringe of grass and thistle. "Why isn't it moving?" She slowly walked towards it. At first, the friends had thought the animal was a dog, and had started ambling towards it while they chatted, but halfway across the tarmac, they had realized it was a fox. It was a cold, cloudless autumn morning, and the sun was bright. None of them could quite believe what they were seeing. The fox kept standing still as they approached. "I saw it once before," whispered Kath, shifting her bag from shoulder to shoulder. "I was with my dad by the canal. He told me there's loads in London now, but you don't normally see 'em." "It should be running," said Keisha anxiously. "I'm staying here. That's got teeth. All the better to eat you with," said Diva. "That was a wolf," said Kath. Kath and Keisha held back. Xana, the blonde girl, slowly approached the fox, with Diva, as usual, by her side. They got closer, expecting it to arch into one of those beautiful curves of animal panic and duck under the fence. It kept not doing so. The girls had never seen any animal so still. It wasn't that it wasn't moving, it was fiercely not moving. By the time they got close to the climbing frame, they were creeping exaggeratedly, like cartoon hunters. The fox eyed Xana's outstretched hand politely. Diva frowned. "Yeah, it is watching," Diva said. "But not us. It's watching you." Gotta drink water. Xana, she hated her name Susanna, and she hated Sue even more, had moved to the estate about a year ago, and quickly made friends with Kath and Keisha and Bex and others, especially Deba. On her way to Kilburn Comprehensive on her first day, Deba had made Xana laugh, which not many people could do. Since then, where Xana was, Deba tended to be too. There was something about Xana that drew attention. She was decent to good at things like sports, schoolwork, dancing, whatever, but that wasn't it. She did well enough to do well, but never enough to stand out. She was tall and striking, but she never played that up either. If anything, she tried to stay in the background, but she never quite could. If she hadn't been easy to get on with, that could have caused her trouble. Sometimes even her mates were a little bit wary of Xana, as if they weren't quite sure how to deal with her. Even Deba herself had to admit that Xana could be a bit dreamy. Sometimes she would sort of zone out, staring skywards, or losing the thread of what she was saying. Just at that moment, however, she was concentrating hard on what Deba had just said. Xana put her hands on her hips, and even her sudden movement didn't make the fox jump. "It's true," said Deba. "It hadn't taken its eyes off you." Xana met the fox's gentle vulpine gaze. All the girls watching and the animals seemed to get lost in something, until their attention was interrupted by the bell for the end of break. The girls looked at each other, blinking. The fox finally moved. Still looking at Xana, it bowed its head. It did it once, and then leapt up and was gone. Deba watched Xana and muttered, "This is just getting weird." Chapter 2. Signs. For the rest of that day, Xana tried to avoid her friends. They eventually caught up with her in the lunch queue, but when she told them to leave her alone, it was in such a nasty voice that they obeyed. "Forget it," said Kath. "She's just rude." "She's mad," said Bex, and they walked away ostentatiously. Only Deba stayed. She didn't try to talk to Xana. Instead, she watched her thoughtfully. That afternoon, she waited for Xana after school. Xana tried to get by in the rush, but Deba wouldn't let her. She crept up on her, then suddenly linked an arm into one of hers. Xana tried to look angry, but it didn't last very long. "Oh, Deeps, what's going on?" she said. They made their way to the estate where they both lived, and headed for Deba's house. Her boisterous, talkative family, while sometimes exasperating with all their noise and kerfuffle, was generally a nice backdrop for any discussion. As usual, people looked at the girls as they passed. They made a funny pair. Deba was shorter and rounder and messier than her skinny friend. Her long black hair was making its usual break for freedom from her ponytail, in contrast to Xana's tightly slicked back blondness. Xana was silent, while Deba kept asking her if she was okay. "Hello, Miss Rasham. Hello, Miss Moon," sang Deba's father as they entered. "What have you been doing? Cup of tea for you ladies?" "Hi, sweetheart," said Deba's mom. "How was your day?" "Hello, Xana. How are you doing?" "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Rasham," said Xana, smiling with her usual nervous pleasure as Deba's parents beamed at her. "Fine, thank you." "Leave her alone, Dad," said Deba, dragging Xana through to her room. "Except for the tea, please." "So, nothing happened to you today," said her mother. "You have nothing to report. You had a totally empty day. You amaze me." "It was fine," she said. "It was always the same as always, innit?" Without getting up, Deba's parents started loudly consoling her about the tragedy of how nothing ever changed for her, and that every day was the same. Deba rolled her eyes at them and closed her door. They sat without speaking for a while. Deba put on lip gloss. Xana just sat. "What we going to do, Xana?" said Deba at last. "Something's going on." "I know, Xana." "I know," said Xana. "It's getting worse." Oops. There goes my water bottle. How's the story so far for you, Martin? Okay, sweet. It was hard to say exactly when it all started. Things had been getting strange for at least a month. "Remember when I saw that cloud," said Deba, "that looked like you?" "That was weeks ago, and it didn't look like anything or anything," Xana said. Let's stick to real stuff then. The fox today, and that woman, what was on the wall, and the letter, that sort of thing." It had been early autumn when the odd events had started to occur. They had been in the Rose Cafe. None of them had paid any attention when the door opened, or until they realized that the woman who'd come in was standing quietly by their table. One by one, they looked at her. "She's been wearing a bus driver uniform," the cap at a perky angle. She was grinning. "Sorry to butt in," the woman said. "I hope you don't. Just very exciting to meet you." She smiled at all of them, but addressed Xana. "Just wanted to say that." This girl stared in dumb astonishment for several seconds. Xana tried to stutter some reply. Kath had bursted out with, "What?" And Deba had started laughing. None of this fazed the woman. She said a nonsense word. "Schwazi," she said. "I heard you'd be here, but I wouldn't have believed it." With one more smile, she left, leaving the girls laughing nervously and loudly until the waitress had asked them to calm down. Nutter, nutter, bloody nutter. If that had been all, it would have just been one of those stories about someone a bit loopy on London streets. But that had not been at all. Some days later, Deba had been with Xana, walking under the old bridge over Iverson Road. She looked up, reading some of the cruder graffiti. There behind the pigeon net, far higher than anyone could have ever reached, was painted in vivid yellow. "Xana forever." "Core, someone else called Xana," Deba said, "or you've got long arms. Or someone massive loves you, Xan." "Shut up," Xana said. "It's true, though. No one else called Xana, you're always saying. Now you've made your mark." A little while after that, the day after Guy Fawkes night, when London was full of bonfires and fireworks, Xana had come to school upset. At last, when she was alone with Deba, Xana had pulled a piece of paper and a card out of her bag. A postman had been waiting outside her front door. He had given her a letter with no name on the envelope, just handed it straight to her as soon as she emerged, and disappeared. She hesitated before showing it to Deba. "Don't tell any of the others," she said. "Swear?" "We look forward to meeting you," Deba read, "when the wheel turns." "Who's it from?" "If I knew, then I wouldn't be freaked out. And there's no stamp." "Is there a mark?" "To say where it came from." "Is that a U? And an L?" "And that says, on, I think." They couldn't read any more. He said something to me, Xana said. The same thing that woman did. Schwazi, he said. I was like, what? I tried to follow him, but he was gone. What does it mean? That's not all. This was in there too. It was a little square card. Some strange design. A beautiful, intricate thing of multicolored, swirling lines. It was, Deba had realized, some mad version of a London travel card. It said it was good for zones 1 to 6, buses and trains all across the city. On the dotted line across its center was carefully printed Xana Moon Schwazi. That was when Deba had told Xana that she had to tell her parents. She herself had kept her promise and never told anyone. Did you tell him? How can I? What am I going to say about the animals? For the last few weeks, dogs would often stop as Xana walked by and stare at her. Once a conga line of 3 squirrels had come down from a tree as Xana sat in Queen's Park, and one by one had put a little nut or seed in front of her. Only cats ignored her. It's mad. I don't know what's going on, and I can't tell them. They'll think I need help. Maybe I do, but I tell you one thing. Her voice was surprisingly firm. I was thinking it when I looked at that fox. At first I was scared. I still don't want to talk about it, not to Kath and that lot, so don't say nothing, alright? But I've had enough. Something's happening? Okay, well I'm ready for it. Outside it was storming. The air was growling and tempestuous. People crammed under eaves or huddled into their coats and shuffled through the rain. Through Deba's window, the girls watched people dance and wrestle with umbrellas. When Xana left, she ran out past a sheltering woman with a ridiculous little dog on a lead. As it saw her, the dog sat up in an oddly dignified way. It bowed its head. Xana looked at the little dog, and obviously as surprised by her own reaction as by the animal's greeting, bowed her head back. Chapter 3. The Visiting Smoke. The next day, Xana and Deba wandered through the playground, watching their reflections in all the puddles. Bedraggled rubbish lurked by walls. The clouds still looked heavy. My dad hates umbrellas, said Deba, swinging her own. When it rains, he always says the same thing. I do not believe the presence of moisture in the air is sufficient reason to overturn society's usual, sensible taboo against wielding spike clubs at eye level. From the edge of the playground, near where the respectful fox had stood, they could see over the school's wall into the street where a few people passed by. Something strange caught Xana's eye. Unclear. By a playing field at the end of the street, smudges were visible on the road. There's something there, said Xana. She squinted. I think it's moving. Is it? Said Deba. The sky seemed unnaturally flat, as if a huge gray sheet had just been pegged out from horizon to horizon above them. The air was still. Very faint, dark stains coiled and disappeared, and the road was unmarked again. Today is not a normal day. Xana shook her head. Birds arched, and clutch of sparrows flew out of nowhere and circled Xana's head in a twittering halo. That afternoon they had French. Xana and Deba were not paying attention, were staring out the windows, drawing foxes and sparrows and rain clouds, until something in Miss Williams' droning made Xana look up. Fuck. Can't speak French. Choices, she said. J choices, two choices. I can't do it. I can't do it. What's she on about? Whispered Deba. No. I can't, the only word that I remember is Schwazi. Miss, said Xana. What was the last one, miss? What does that mean? Miss Williams poked the board. This one, she said. Voice as choisi. Voice, you, plural. Avez, have. Choisi, chosen. Schwazi, chosen. At the end of the day, Diva and Xana stood by the school gate and looked out where they had seen the marks. It was still drizzling, and by the playing fields the rain looked to be falling, as if against resistance, as if it hit a patch of odd air. You coming to Roses? Kath and the others are standing behind them. We thought we saw something, Diva said. We was just going to. Her voice petered out, and she followed Xana. Behind them, a scrum of their classmates was rushing by, heading home or meeting their parents. What you looking for? Said Keisha. She and Cass stood watching quizzically as Xana stood in the middle of the road a few meters away and looked around. I can't see nothing, she whispered. Xana stood for a long time as the others humped impatiently. Alrighty then, she said, raising her voice. Kath had her arms folded and one eyebrow raised. Let's go. The stream of their classmates had ended. A few cars emerged from the gates and swept past them as their teachers headed home. The little group of girls were alone in the street. With a sputtering crack, the street lights came on as the sky darkened. Rain was coming down hard, like a typewriter on Diva's umbrella. Don't know what she's doing, Diva heard Beck saying to Keisha and Kath. Xana walked a little ahead of them, her feet sending up little sprays of rain like mist. A lot like mist. A dark mist. Xana swallowed. And she slowed. She and Diva looked down. What now? Said Keisha in exasperation. At their feet, a few centimeters above the dirty, wet tarmac, there was a layer of coiling smoke. What is that? Said Kath. Wafts were rising from the gutters. The smoke was a horribly dirty dark. It emerged in drifts and tendrils, reaching through the metal grills of the drains, like growing vines or octopus legs. Ropes of it tangled and thickened. They coiled around the wheels of vehicles and under their engines. What's going on? Whispered Keisha. Smoke was beginning to boil out of the sewers. A smell of chemicals and rot thickened in the air. Far off and muffled, as if by a curtain, the noise of a motor was audible. Xana was standing with her arms out, focusing intensely into sudden fumes that circled them. For a second it looked as if the rain was pelting. For a second it looked as if the rain that was pelting them was evaporating, like drops on hot metal, a few millimeters above Xana's head. Diva stared, but dark drifts hid her friend. The motor was louder. A car was approaching. The girls were shrouded in gritty smoke. They sputtered in panic and tried to call out to each other. They could almost see nothing. The noise of the motor grew, and the glints of reflected street lamp light winked momentarily through the fumes. Wait a minute, Xana shouted. Through the fog, headlights suddenly flared, heading straight for Xana. Diva saw her, turned into a shadow, sidestepping neatly as if the lights bore down, her hands seeming to glow. It's my dad, Xana shouted, and moved fast as the car raced into the smoke. And there was a rush as the fumes dissipated, and there was a bang. Something went flying, and there was silence. The clouds darkened, and the rain stopped. The strange fumes dropped out of the air and flooded like thick, dark water back into the gutters, gushing soundlessly out of sight. For a few seconds no one moved. A car skewed across the road with Xana's dad sitting in the front seat, looking confused. Someone was shouting hysterically. Someone fair was lying by a wall. "Xana!" Diva shouted, but Xana was beside her. It was Bex who had been hit, who lay motionless. "We have to get a doctor," said Xana, pulling out her mobile, and started to cry, but Kath was already through to 999. Xana's dad staggered out the car, coughing. "What the... what?" he said. What happened?" He saw Bex. "Oh my God." He dropped to his knees beside her. "What did I do?" he kept saying. "I've called an ambulance," Cass said, but he wasn't listening. Now the lights were back to normal, and there was no fog lapping at ankle height. People were peering out of doors and windows. Bex moved noises. What happened? And his dad kept asking them. None of them knew what to say. "I don't remember anything," he said. "I just woke up and..." "It hurts," Bex wailed. "Did you see?" Xana whispered to Diva. Her voice sounded as if it were cracking. "The smoke, the car, everything. It was all thick around me. It's trying to get me." Very intense few chapters already. So, Martin, what you think? Oh, fuck. You scared the shit out of me. You scared me, Anthony. A little bit. Fuck off. I'm annoyed. You really went nim nim. And it scared me. A really weird random ass noise and you went nim nim. Okay. Chapter 4. The Watcher in the Night. That night, and the two that followed, Xana stayed over at Diva's house. Just then, she preferred it to her own place across the yard of the estate. Her father was in a bit of a state. The police kept asking him to tell the story again and telling him there was no sign of the chemical spill. He thought might explain the smoke that had made him lightheaded. While he had to deal with the questions, Mr. and Mrs. Moon gratefully accepted the Rasham's suggestion that Xana stay with them. The police had also asked the girls what had happened, of course, but Xana and Diva couldn't really explain what they didn't understand. "She had a huge shock, Miss Rasham," Diva heard one of her officers say. "She's not making a bit of sense." "We have to make them believe us," Xana insisted. "What?" said Diva. "Magic smoke came out of the drains? Think that'll help?" Bex had broken a couple of bones but was recovering, so at least Xana and Diva understood. Bex herself wouldn't speak to them. She wouldn't see them when they came to the hospital, nor would she answer her phone. And it wasn't just her. Kath and Keisha ignored Xana and Deba at school and wouldn't answer their calls either. "They're blaming me for what happened," Xana said to Deba in a strange voice. "They're scared," Deba said. The two girls were sitting up late in Deba's room, Xana in the fold-out bed, and they're blaming me. And maybe they're right. In the next room, the Rashams shouted at the television, "Idiots! They're all fools. Except that environment woman, Raleigh. She's alright. She's the only one that does any good." The Rashams were still having the conversation, the same one they had many times, about which politicians they disliked most, and the much more rare species which they liked, a short list of one. Much later, when they went to bed, Xana and Deba were still whispering. "It must have been an accident," Deba said. "Something with the pipes?" They said it wasn't. "And anyway, you don't believe that. It's something else. Something to do with me," was what she didn't say, but what they both knew she meant. They had the same conversation every day. There was no conclusions they could come to, but there was nothing else they could talk about either. They talked themselves out and eventually fell asleep. Much later, in the small hours of the night, Deba woke quite suddenly. She sat up in her bed by the window and pulled aside the curtains a little to look out across the estate and try to work out what had disturbed her. She watched for a long time. Occasionally a figure might hurry by, following the tiny red glimmer of a cigarette end. At this time of night, though, the concrete square, the big metal bins, the walkways were mostly empty. On the other side of the yard, she could see Xana's flat, its windows dark. The wind turned corkscrews in the courtyard, and Deba watched bits of rubbish turn. It was raining a little. The moon glinted in puddles. In the far corner was a pile of full black rubbish bags. There was a tiny scratching sound. Deba thought it must have been a cat, searching in the rubbish. There was a quiet, except for the finger-trip drumming of rain and the whisper of waste paper. Then she heard it again, an insistent scritch. "Xana," she whispered, shaking her friend awake. "Listen." The two girls looked out into the darkness. In the shadows by the bin, something was moving. A wet black shape, rooting in the plastic. It moved toward the light. It didn't look like a cat, nor a crow, nor a lost dog. It was long and spindly and flapping all at once. It extended a limb out of the shadows. Something glinting and black fluttered. Xana and Deba held their breath. Shaking with the effort, the claw-winged thing hauled itself through shadows, spidery and bedraggled. It approached Xana's house. It huddled in the dark by the wall, leapt suddenly up, and hung below the window. The two girls gasped. The thing was just visible now, in the faint lamplight. It was an umbrella. For a long time it hung like some odd fruit below the windowsill, while the rain increased, until the watching friends began to tell themselves that they had imagined the motion, that there had been an umbrella hooked on the ledge for hours. Then the dark little thing moved again. It dropped and crawled with its excruciating slowness back to the darkness. It opened its canopy a little way, gripped the concrete with a metal point, and dragged itself along. It was bent, or battered, or bent and battered, or torn, and it crawled like something injured, into the shadows and out of sight. The courtyard was empty. Deba and Xana looked at each other. "Oh my God," whispered Xana. That was squeaked Diva. Was that an umbrella? How was that possible? Xana said. What was it doing by your window? Chapter 5. Down to the Cellar. The two girls crept into the estate night. Quick, Xana whispered. It was over there. This is mad, hissed Diva, but she moved as quickly as her friend, in the same half-bent run. We don't even have a flashlight. Yeah, but we've gotta look, Xana said. What is going on? They shivered a little in the clothes that they had quickly put on, looking nervously around them into darkness and halos of lamplight. They headed for the bins in the hollow full of rubbish where they had seen the impossible spy. So, it was some sort of remote control thing, innit? Diva said as Xana looked around in the smelly dark. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it had a camera or something, and Diva stopped as what she was saying began to sound more and more unlikely. Come help me, Xana said. What are you doing? Looking for something. What? Xana poked about in the rubbish, holding her nose as she prodded the overspill from the bins with a stick. There's going to be rats and stuff, Diva said. Leave it. Look, said Xana. See that? She pointed at one streak among many across the cement of the estate. The smear, just faintly visible, stretched from the rubbish tip towards the dark ground floor windows of Xana's house. That thing, these are its tracks. Xana got on her hands and knees. You see, yeah, see, she said. You see scratch marks, where it dug in with its, metal points. If you say, said Diva, let's go. Look, it was watching, or listening, or whatever at mine. Now we can see where it went. We don't even know what we're after. Diva followed Xana, who bent carefully over and traced her way through the dark estate. Diva peered over her friend's shoulder, trying to make out the tracks Xana could see. You blatantly look like a mad person, Diva whispered. If anyone sees you, what are they going to think? Who cares? Anyway, there's no one. If there was, I'd be out of here. I don't even see nothing. Marks, Xana said. Tracks. She headed into the backs of the estate, between the brown concrete of those huge buildings. They were heading deep into the dead zones, behind all the towers, into a maze of walls, bins, garages, and rubbish. Diva looked around nervously. Come on, Xan. We don't know where we are. I've got a feeling, Xana said. She was distracted. This way, she said, glancing down without slowing. In fact, she looked now as if she were following a memory, or an instinct rather than a trail. She wound between the enormous buildings, lit here and there by inadequate yellow lights. I can't see it, Diva said anxiously. There's nothing. Yes, there is, said Xana dreamily. She pointed, almost without looking. There, see? She sounded surprised. It came this way. She accelerated. Xana, said Diva in alarm, and trotted to keep up with her. How can you even see that? The main road was just out of sight. Even at this hour, they could hear traffic. Xana turned a corner, moving almost as if she was being tugged. Wait, said Diva, and came up behind her. In front of them, in the base of one of the monoliths, surrounded by puddles of pretty oily water, below a weakly shining lamp, the girls saw a door. It was ajar. On its threshold, even Diva could see it was marked with a smear of oil. No way, Diva said, eyeing Xana. You are not going there. Xana stepped inside, behind her, shouting, Wait, wait, Diva followed. Is anyone there? Zena said, not very loud. They were in a narrow corridor below ground level. The only windows were stubby ones. By the ceiling, cracked and flecked with cobwebs and fly husks. The one or two light bulbs lit light out resentfully, as if they were miserers who hoarded it. We are going, Diva said. There's nothing here. Pipes and wires ran along the walls and meters ticked. Hello, Zana said. The corridor ended up in a huge basement. It must have stretched underneath almost the whole tower block. Along its walls were old tools. There was rope and thick puddles and sacks and rusted bicycles and a dried out, warmed up fridge. Here and there were faint illuminations, and the light from the street lamps came through the filthy windows. The girls could hear the moan of traffic. In the middle of the room was a pillar of pipes, where needles jerked up and down on gauges, and pressure was channeled by fat iron taps. In the dead center was an ancient, heavy-looking one the size of a steering wheel. It looked like it could be opened. It looked like it would open an airlock in a submarine. Let's go, whispered Diva. This place is scary. But slowly Xana shuffled forward. She looked like a sleepwalker. Xana! Diva moved back towards the door. We're alone in a cellar, and no one knows we're here. Come on. There's more oil, Xana said. That thing, the umbrella, was here. She touched the big spigot experimentally. When the wheel turns, she said. What? Said Diva. Come on, you coming? She turned her back. Xana gripped the wheel and began to turn it. It moved slowly at first. She had to strain. It squeaked against rust. As it went, something happened to the light. Diva froze. Xana hesitated, then turned the wheel a few more degrees. The light began to change. It was flickering. All the sound in the room was ebbing. Diva turned back. What's happening? She whispered. Xana tugged, and with each motion, the light and noise faltered a moment, and the wheel turned a little farther. No, said Diva. Stop. Please. Xana turned the valve another few inches, and the sound and light shifted. All the bulbs in the room flared, and so impossibly did the sound of the cars outside. The iron wheel began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster. The room got darker. You're turning off the electricity, Diva said, and then she went silent. As she and Xana looked up and realized that the lamplight shining through the windows from outside was also dimming. As the light lessened, so did the sound. Diva and Xana stared at each other in wonder. Xana spun the handle as if it were oiled. The noise of cars and vans and motorbikes outside grew tinny, grew tinny, like a recording, or as if it came from a television in the next room. The sound of the vehicles faded with the glow of the main road. Xana was turning off the traffic. The spigot turned off all the cars and turned off the lamps. It was turning off London. Oh fuck, my water bottle fell. Okay. Alright. Scared the shit out of me, water bottle. Okay. Part 2. Not in Kilburn. Chapter 6. The Trash Pack. The wheels spun, the light changed, the sound changed. The glow from outside went from the din of streetlights down to darkness, then slowly back up to something luminous but odd. The last of the car engines sounded very far away, and then was gone. At last the wheels slowed and stopped. Diva stood frozen, her hands to her mouth, in the strange, not dark. Xana blinked several times as if waking. The two looked at each other, and around the room, all different in the bizarre light filled of impossible shadows. "Quick, undo it," Diva said at last. She grabbed the wheel and tried to turn it backwards. It was wedged stubbornly, as if it hadn't moved for years. "Help!" she said, and Xana added her strength to Diva's, and with a burst of effort they made the metal move. But the wheel just spun free. It wasn't catching on anything. It just whirred heavily around, but the light didn't change, and the noise of traffic didn't return. London didn't come back on. "Xana," said Diva, "what did you do?" "I don't know," whispered Xana. "I don't know." "Let's get out of here," Diva said. Xana grabbed her arm and they ran back into the corridor. The peculiar light was shining around the edges of the doorway they had just come in by, as if a giant black and white television were playing just outside. Diva and Xana went for it full tilt and shoved it open. They stumbled out and stopped and looked around and let their mouths hang open. It was not night anymore, and they weren't in this estate. They were somewhere very else. Just as it had been when they entered, the door opened on waste ground between tall buildings, and to either side were big metal bins and spilled rubbish. But the tower blocks were not those they had left behind. The walls just kept going up. Everywhere they looked, they were surrounded by enormous concrete monoliths that dwarfed those they remembered and stood in more chaotic configurations. Not a single one of them was broken by a single window. The door swung shut and clicked. Xana tugged it. Of course it was locked. The building they emerged from soared into a sky glowing a peculiar glow. "Maybe that room's like a train carriage," Diva whispered. "And we've come down the line and was later than we thought." "Maybe," whispered Xana, doubtfully, trying the door again. "So, how do we get back?" "Why did you turn it?" Diva said. "I don't know," said Xana, stricken. "I just thought like I had to." Holding each other's arm for comfort, peering everywhere wide-eyed, Xana and Diva crept into the passageways between the walls. "I'm calling Mom," Diva said, and took out her phone. She was about to dial when she stopped and stared at the screen. She showed it to Xana. It was covered in symbols they'd never seen before. Where the reception bar usually was some sort of corkscrew. Instead of a network side was a weird pictogram. Diva scrolled through her address book. "What's that mean?" said Xana. "Those aren't my friends' names," whispered Diva. Her phone's contact list contained random words in alphabetical order. Acity, Baltalar, Cepheid, Dillybag. "Mine's the same," said Xana, checking her own. Anatios? Follicus? Goosegog? What is that? Diva dialed her home number. "Hello?" she whispered. "Hello?" From the phone sounded a close-up buzzing like a wasp. It was so loud and sudden in the silent place that Diva turned it off in alarm. She and Xana stared at each other. "Let me try," said Xana. She but dialing her number led to the same unpleasant insect noise. No reception, she said, as if that were all that was wrong. Neither of them said anything more about the strange words or pictures on their phones. They went deeper into the cavern between the windowless buildings. "We have to get out of here," said Xana, speeding up. They ran past wind-blown old newspaper, deserted tin cans, and the rustling of black rubbish bags. In growing terror, they turned left, then right, then left, and then Xana came to a sudden stop and Deepa bumped into her. "What?" said Deepa, and Xana hushed her. "I thought," she said. "Listen." Deepa bit her lip. Xana swallowed several times. For long seconds there was silence, then a very faint noise. There was a rustling, what might be a light football. "Someone's coming," whispered Xana. Her voice was halfway between hope and despair. Would this person help, or be more troubles? Then she slumped and pointed. It was just a torn black rubbish bag billowing nearby. It scraped gently against the ground. Deepa sighed and watched it despondently as it fluttered a little closer. There was more rubbish behind it. With the apparently I can't read. With the clatter, a can rolled into view, and there was the whisper of newspaper. A little collection of discarded stuff swirled at the passage entrance. The girls leaned against the wall. "We gotta think," Deepa said, and tried and failed to use her phone again. "Deepa," Xana whispered. There was more rubbish than had been there a moment before. The black plastic in the can, the newspapers were joined by greasy hamburger wrappers, a grocery bag, several apple cores, and scrunched up clear plastic. The rubbish rustled. More rolled into view: chicken bones, empty tubes of toothpaste, a milk carton. Debris blocked off the way they had come home. Deepa and Xana stared. The rubbish was moving towards them. It was coming against the wind. As the girls began to creep backwards, it seemed as if the rubbish realized they were onto it. It sped up. The cartons and cans rolled in their direction. The paper fluttered for them as madly as agitated butterflies. The plastic bag reached out their handles and scrambled towards the girls. Deepa and Xana screamed and ran. They heard the manic, wet rustle of the predatory rubbish. They raced through the maze of walls, desperate to get away. Behind them there was a scrunching of paper, a percussion of cardboard, the squelch of damp things moving fast. The girls were fighting for breath. "I can't," said Deepa. Xana tried to pull her along, but Deepa could only flatten against a wall. "Oh, help," she whispered. Xana stood in front of her, between her friend and their pursuers. The rubbish was close. It had slowed. It was creeping towards them. The stinking heap came with motions as careful and cat-like as its odd shapes would allow. The stench of old dustbins was strong. Rugged black plastic reached out with its ripped arms, trailing rubbish juice like a slug's slime. Xana raised her arms in despairing defense, and Deepa held her breath and closed her eyes. How mad would you be if I left you here on a cliffhanger? water. Okay. Chapter 7, Market Day. Oi! A voice came from behind them, and stones began to whistle past them. Someone grabbed Diva and Xana by their collars and hauled them backwards out of the alley. It was a boy. They stared at him as he elbowed in front of them, chucking more pebbles and bits of brick and brandishing a stick at the rubbish, which was cowering. "Go on," he said. He threw another well-aimed stone. The rubbish flinched, retreated. "Get out of it," the boy shouted. "Disgusting." The rubbish scrambled to get away. "Oh no." Oh, oh, he's here. Oh man. Okay. Xena and Diva stared. The boy turned to them and winked. He was about their age, very thin and wiry, dressed in odd, patched-up, grubby clothes. His hair was messy, his face shrewd. He was raising an eyebrow. "What's that all about?" he said, putting his hands on his hips. "You ain't scared of a trash bag, are you? Pests like them need a much bigger lot than to do you any damage." He lobbed another stone. "If you're that yellow, why you walking off into the back wall maze? You wouldn't like it if they came swarming into your manor, would you? Mind how you go." He nodded and half grinned, gave them a little salute, then strode off, away from the wall, brushing dirt from his already dirty clothes. "Wait a minute," Diva managed to say. "We don't know where we—" Xana said. Their voices trailed off as they watched as the boy go, and saw the square he had pulled them into. It was big, full of stalls and scores of people, movement, the bustle of a market. There were costumes and colors, but above all the girls' attention was taken by the light shining down from above. In the narrow alleys they had only seen slivers of sky. This was the first time since emerging from the door that they had a clear view. The sky was gray, not blue. Here and there were a few scurrying clouds, unfolding like milk and water. They moved in all different directions, as if they were on errands. "Deebs," said Xana, swallowing. "What is that?" Diva's throat dried as she looked up. "No wonder the light's weird," whispered Xana. The orb above them was huge and low in the sky, a circle at least 3 times the size of the sun. It shone with peculiar, cool, dark light like that of some autumn mornings, giving everything crisp edges and shadows. It was the yellow-white of a grubby tooth. Diva and Xana looked directly at it without hurting their eyes. For seconds, their mouths wide open. The sun had a hole in it. It hung over the city, not like a disc or a coin or a ball, but like a donut. A perfect circle was missing from its middle. They could see the gray sky through it. "Oh, the fuck is that?" They did not curse. Diva stepped forward, staring at the impossible sun shining like a fat ring. She looked down. The boy who had rescued her was gone. "What's going on?" Diva shouted. People in the market turned to look at her. "Where are we?" she whispered. After a few seconds, people went back to their business, whatever that was. Okay, we have to figure this out," said Diva. Behind them was a blank concrete wall, the edge of the maze they had come through, broken by a few alley entrances. In front, the market stretched as far as they could see. "Why'd you turn that stupid wheel? Like I knew we were going to end up here. Can't ever leave anything alone." Hesitantly, the 2 girls stepped into the rows of tents, buyers and sellers. There was nowhere else to go. They were immediately surrounded by the animated jabbering of a market morning. Diva and Xana kept looking up at that extraordinary, hollow sun, but the scene around them was almost as bizarre. There were people in all kinds of uniforms, mechanic overalls smeared in oil, firefighters' protective clothes, doctors' white coats, the blue of police, and others, including people in the neat suits of waiters, with cloths over one arm. All the uniforms looked like dressing up costumes. They were too neat, and somehow a little bit too simple. There were other shoppers in hodgepodge outfits of rags and patchworks of skin, and what looked in some cases like taped together bits of plastic or foil. Xana and Deba walked further into the crowd. Xan, Deba whispered, look. Here and there were the strangest figures, people whose skin were no colors skin should ever be, or who seemed to have a limb or two too many, or peculiar extrusions or concavities in their face. Yeah, said Xana with some sort of hollow, calm voice. I see them. What? Is that it? You see them? What are they, for God's sake? How should I know? But are you surprised, after everything? A woman went by above them, pedaling furiously as if she was on a bicycle, striding on two enormously spindly mechanical legs. Strange little figures flitted by at the edges of the market, too fast to clearly see. Deba murmured an apology as she bumped into someone. The woman who bowed politely to her wore glasses with several layers of lenses, lowered and raised on levers, seemingly at random. Lovely arrangements, the girl heard. Get them here, brighten up the home. Right beside them was a stall bursting in flamboyant bouquets, carefully arranged in colored paper. They're not flowers, Diva said. They were tools. Each was a bunch of hammers, screwdrivers, spanners, and levels, bright plastic and metal, carefully arranged and tied together with a bow. What on earth are you wearing? Someone said. Xana turned as someone picked at her hoodie. The man was tall and thin, with a jagged halo of thick, spiky hair. His suit was white and covered with tiny black marks. It was print. His clothes were made from pages from books, immaculately sewn together. No, this won't do, he said. He spoke quickly, tugging at Xana's clothes too fast for her to stop him. This is very drab, can't possibly keep you entertained. What you need, he flourished his sleeve, is this, the hottest of couture. Be entertained while you wear. Never again need you face the misery of unreadable clothes. Now you can pick your favorite words of fiction or non-fiction for your sleeves. Perhaps a classic for the trousers, poetry for your skirt, historiography for your socks, scripture for knickers. Learn while you dress. He whipped a tape from his pocket and began to measure Xana. He yanked at his head, and Xana and Deba winced and gasped. What had looked like hair was countless pins and needles, jammed anyhow into a scalp, a handful of which he pulled out. The man did not bleed or seem to suffer any discomfort from treating himself as a pincushion. He wedged some of the pins back into his head, and there was a faint psst with each puncture, as if his skull was velvet. Busily he began to pin bits of paper to Xana, scribbling measurements on a notebook. What if it rains, you say? Well, then rejoice as your outfit cuddles you in its gentle slushing, and you're given the opportunity for an entirely new book. How wonderful. I have a vast selection. He indicated his stall, crammed with volumes, from which assistants tore pages and stitched. What genres and literatures are to your taste? Please, stammered Xana. Leave it, said Diva. Leave us alone. No, thank you, Xana said. The girls turned and ran. Hey! The man shouted. Are you alright? But they did not slow down. They ran past chefs, baking roof tiles in their ovens and chiseling apart bricks over pans, frying the whites and the yolks that emerged, past confectioners with jars full of candied leaves, past what looked like an argument at a honey stall between a bear in a suit and a cloud of bees in the shape of a man. At last they reached a little clearing deep in the market containing a pump and a pillar. They stopped, their hearts pounding. What are we going to do? Said Deba. I don't know. They looked up at the empty-hearted sun above them. Deba dilated. Are you fucking kidding me? Deba dialed her home once more. Hello, Mom, she whispered. There was that frenetic buzzing. From a little hole at the back of her phone burst a handful of wasps. Deba shrieked and dropped the phone, and the wasp flew off in a different direction. Her phone was broken. She sat heavy at the pillar's base. Xana stared at her, and her face began to crease. It'll be okay, said Deba. It'll be alright. How? Said Xana. How will it? Xana and Deba stared at each other. From her wallet, Xana drew out the strange travel card she had been sent weeks ago. She stared at it as if it might have contained some sort of clue, some advice, but it was only a card. Deba put her arm around her friend. Neither of them wanted to attract the attention of the strange market-goers. They sat quietly for a couple of minutes. Ahem. Cautiously, the two girls looked up. Standing before them was the boy who had scared off the trash bag. He eyed them with a look somewhere between sarcasm and concern. I was just wondering, he said, is that yours? He pointed near their feet, at an empty cardboard milk carton. Xana and Deba stared at it. The carton moved eagerly towards them, opening and closing its folded spout. Deba and Xana yelped and withdrew their feet. It was one of the pieces of rubbish that chased them earlier. I was gonna kick it back into the maze, he said, but I thought maybe it was a pet. No, Deba said guardedly. It's not ours. It must have followed us, said Xana. Righto, the boy said, stuck his hands in his pockets, whistled a tune for a second or two. He looked at them quizzically. Well, he hesitated. Can I just ask, are you okay? He sat down beside them. What's your name, then? I'm Hemi. Pleased to meet you all in that. He stuck out his hand. Xana and Deba looked at it suspiciously. Eventually, they took it and said their names. So what's up with you two, then? He said. What happened? We don't know what happened, Xana said. We don't know where we are, said Deba. We don't know what that is. She pointed up to the sky. We don't know what's going on, Xana finished. Well, the boy Hemi said slowly, you two don't know a lot, do you? But I might be able to help you. I could tell you where you are for a start. His voice dropped, and the girls eagerly listened in close to hear him. You're, he whispered, in Lun Dun. The girls waited for the words to make sense, but they didn't. Hemi was grinning. On London, he repeated. Said Xana. Lun Dun. Yeah, he said. On London. And suddenly the three sounds fell into a different shape, and Xana said the name. On London. On London, Deba said. Hemi nodded, and crept an inch closer. On London, he said, and he reached for Xana. Hey! A loud voice interrupted. Xana, Deba, and the boy jumped. The milk carton squeaked out air and scuttled behind Deba. There, in front of them, was the pincushion man, his needles winking in the light Don't you dare, the book-wearing fashion designer shouted. Get out. Hemi leapt up, made a rude noise, and sped away, ducking at astonishing speed between the legs of passersby into the crowd and out of sight. What were you doing? Xana shouted. He was helping us. Helping, the man said. Do you have any idea who that was? He was one of them. One of who? A ghost. Diba and Xana stared at him. You heard me, he said. A ghost. He's from Wraith Town. And did he make you get really close to him? I saw him trying to grab. Well, we couldn't really hear him, so he was leaning in, Diba said. Aha, I knew it. One more minute and he could have possessed you. That's what they want. They're desperate for bodies. They'll possess you as soon as they look at you. Sneaky little whisper. Possess me? Absolutely. Or you. He nodded at Xana. Why do you think he was talking to you? But he has a body, said Xana. We shook his hand. The man looked a little put out. Well, yes, technically he has a body, that one. If you want to be really precise about it, he's a half-ghost. But don't you be fooled by his whole flesh and bone, just like you act. He'll steal your body just like the rest of his family. It's just as well I came looking for you, the man said kindly. You worried me back there. I suppose I can just understand someone not wanting to benefit from the astonishing opportunity of this new form of apparel, which literally clothes you in education. Seeing their faces, he cut his patter off with visible effort. Sorry. Anyway, the point is that both of you look so scared. I wanted to check if you were alright. Xana stared into the crowd. What is this place? What do you mean? The pin-haired man said. It's Rogue Day. This is Rogue Day Market, of course. You can't seriously tell me that you haven't been here before. What's that? Before Xana could stop him, he had reached out and taken the travel card from her. Take that back. Take it back. Give it back, she shouted. The man's eyes were growing wider and wider, and he gasped at the piece of card, and back at Xana. Oh, my fizzy dog, he said. No wonder you're confused. You're not from here at all. You're the Schwazi. There was a little intake of breath from the group of market-goers around them. Xana and Diba looked at each other, and at the people watching. Amongst the men and women in those unconvincing uniforms were odder figures still, like a woman who seemed to be made out of metal, and someone wearing one of those old-fashioned diving suits with weighted boots and a big brass helmet, windowed with dark glass. Everyone was staring at Xana. Unstestable boots, someone said reverently. I can't believe it. The Schwazi. Well, Xana said, I don't know much. Wait, the pin-headed man said and looked around. We have to be careful. We need to take you somewhere safe, just in case. Some of the onlookers were nodding and glancing around. I just can't believe you're here, and you brought a friend. He nodded politely to Diba. But there will be time for all of this later. Right now, let's get you out of here. School, he said. You go check the schedule. You know where we're going and how. The driver gave a laborious nod and headed off. I'll get the Schwazi and her friend ready. If, he said with sudden nervous politeness, that's alright with her and everyone else. He looked at the people listening. Not a word about this. Shut up. This is our chance. The onlookers nodded. If you follow me, we'll get ready. It'll be my honor to take you. Xana said nothing, but he continued. You're willing. That's marvelous, really. We've not been introduced. You are the Schwazi, and I say it's an honor, he said, the last phrase so quickly it sounded like one word. Oh, actually is Nana. They're mumbling. Obadiah Fing, the courtier of Obadiah Fing Designs, or courtier. I can't say it. The fucking designer. Perhaps you heard of me. Not the wearable blicks, I know, but perhaps the edible cravat? No, the two-person trouser. Doesn't ring a bell. Never mind, never mind. I'm at your service. This is Diba, says Anna, and I'm the Schwazi. Absolutely, the man said. A pleasure. Now, if you please, Schwazi, I don't want to alarm you, but you already had a run-in with the attempted flesh theft, and I'll feel much happier if you stick with me. From behind them was the clatter of the milk carton. Go away, as Anna told it and pointed. The carton retreated a few centimeters. Air whistled from its spout. It sounded like it was whimpering. Schwazi, please, Fing said, beckoning. Oh, all right, Diva said to the carton. She nodded at Zana. I'll sort it. You can come, she said to the rubbish. But if you gang up with your friends again, you're gone. Diva jerked her head in invitation, and the milk carton scampered after her, rolling over the cobbles. Behind them, the last of the little gathering dispersed. Several people watched Zana go. They looked excited and secretive and very pleased. One man was standing still. He was chubby and muscular, squeezed into a painter's duragras, completed with streaks of paint. Diba looked back, and he met her eyes for a moment, then looked back at Zana very thoughtfully. He disappeared into the crowd, moving fast. What? Said Zana, pulling Diba to come. Nothing, said Diba. I just felt like someone was watching us. Watching you, she thought, and looked at her friend. I'm gonna pause there. I need to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Hey, I'm back. Okay. Chapter 9. Location. I should have realized, Obadiah said, that you're rivals. When I saw you talking to that ghost boy, he hangs around, stealing, looking for strangers. But so far we managed to get rid of him before he does anything terrible. You do not want to make it into his phone book. What? Said Zana. In Rafe Town, said Obadiah. They keep a list of all the dead, on both sides of the odd. Our phones don't work, Deba said. They're bust. You have phones. What in the abyssity for? It's too hard to train the insects. As far as I know, there are about 3 working phones in London, each with a very carefully maintained hive, and all of them in Mr. Speaker's Talklands. No wonder you're confused. When did you get here? You must have been briefed. No, not briefed. He frowned. Maybe the profs are planning on explaining details later. What profs? Deba said. And here we are, said Obadiah Fing, waving at his stall. Obadiah's assistants looked up from their stitching. 1 or 2 had a few needles and pins wedged into their heads and amongst plaits and ponytails. At the rear of the stall sat a figure writing in a huge sheet of paper. Where it said should be was a big glass jar full of black ink, into which it dipped its pen. Simon Artementi, Obadiah said. The ink-well-headed person waved with stained fingers and returned to its writing. For clients who insist on bespoke copy. The stall looked as if it was only about 6 feet deep, but when Obadiah swept aside a curtain at the back, there was a much larger tent room beyond. It was silk lined. There was a table and chairs, a cabinet and a stove, hammocks hanging from the ceiling. Plump pillows were everywhere. Just my little office, Obadiah said, sweeping off dust. This is amazing, said Zana. You never know this was here. How come there's space, said Deba. I beg your pardon, Deba said. Oh, well, I stitched it myself. After all my years, I'd be embarrassed if I hadn't learned to stitch a few wrinkles in space. He looked expectant. He waited. Eventually Zana said, that's brilliant. Obadiah smiled, satisfied. No, it's nothing, he said, waving his hands. Really, you embarrass me. He picked things up and put them down, packing and unpacking a bag, talking all the time. A stream of odd phrases and non sequitur. Fuck that word. So incomprehensible that they all quickly stopped hearing it, except as a sort of amiable buzzing. We have to go home, Zana said, interrupting Obadiah's spiel. Obadiah frowned, not unkindly. Home? But you have things to do, Schwazi. Don't call me that. I'm Zana. And we really do have to go. We have to get back, said Deba. The little milk carton whined air at her miserable voice. If you say so, but I'm afraid I don't know how to get you back to what's it called, to London. Zana and Deba stared at each other. Seeing their faces, Obadiah continued quickly. But, don't worry, he said. The prophecies will know what to do. We just have to get you to them. They'll help you back after what you needed to do. Prophecies, says Zana. Let's go see then. Of course, we're just waiting for school with the necessary information. Traveling across to London, well, it's quite a thing to take on. He disappeared behind a screen and flung his paper and print clothes on one by one over the top. Moby Dick, he said. Even with small print, I have to wear too many undershirts. He emerged in a new suit, of the same cut, but adorned with visibly larger letters. The other side of the mountain, he smiled, flashing his cuff. Considerably shorter. Zan, said Deba urgently, I want to go home. Mr. Fink, please, Anna said. You really have to get us out of here. Obadiah Fink looked miserable. I simply don't know how, he said at last. I don't know how you got here. I don't know where you live. There are plenty of people who don't believe in London at all. I'm sorry. Truly. Schwazi. Zana. All I can do is take you to those who can help, as fast as we can. Believe me, I want you to get started ASAP. Get started? Said Zana. With what? The profiteers will explain, Obadiah said. No. Get started with what? Well, with everything. We have to get you out of here. There are those working against you, working for your enemy. My enemy? Who's my enemy? Before Obadiah could respond, the curtain was pulled back and there stood School. The figure in the driving suit, tapping its wrist urgently. Now! Already! Right, we're coming. Off we go. He grabbed a few more things, hauled his bag over his shoulder, and ushered everyone out. Who? Oh, honestly, Schwazi, it's really best you let those who know these things explain. What enemy? The girls stared at Obadiah, and he faltered and was momentarily still. Smog, he whispered. Then he cleared his throat and walked hurriedly on. And I'm gonna leave that there. Good night. Whee! Or I can't stop this stupid thing.